Kinnah 10, Echaya Shva Chavata Sasharon, focuses on the 24 Mishmaros. What are these Mishmaros? Every Mishmar constituted a group of Kohanim, Leviim, and Israelim, regular Jews. In a weekly cycle, each Mishmar would send the Kohanim and Leviim from their group to perform the ritual service in the temple, while the Israelim, some of them went with the Kohanim and Leviim to the temple to watch and pray that the karbanos, that the sacrifices brought, should be accepted by God, and some of them would stay home. Some of them would gather in their cities, and effectively they'd have 4 days that were similar to Yom Kippur. They would fast, obviously only during the day. They would daven Ne'ilah. They would lane, special laning from the creation story. Effectively, they would spend their time in prayer and dedication to God, all centered on the temple and the hope that God would answer their prayers and do what was good for the Jewish people. The destruction of the temple, of course, causes us to lose this emphasis, the centrality of the temple service. I think that a parallel, perhaps, is something like Miluim in Eretz Yisrael, in Israel. So, of course, Jews go to the army, and while there is a required service, depending on, of course, which part of the army, which program one does, even after dismissal from active army service, there's Miluim, which is that every once in a while your unit is called up and you go and you practice and you do whatever's necessary. And it's the ultimate excuse. Not in a bad way. I mean, if you a business meeting, you have something that you're supposed to go to, you're supposed to meet with somebody, so I had Miluim. And everybody understands what the answer is. Everybody knows that that trumps all. How vital it is for the country to have a strong strong military, and so as it were, the entire country stops, or every individual has to stop when called upon for this, and the same would have been true. The same would be true, should be true, with the Mishmaros. If it comes your turn, then that's it. There's nothing else that's important. There's no business meeting that's important. There's no hike that's important. There's no trip that's important. Everything falls away to the need to go and perform the service in the temple. And in that way, all of Israel, because in there are 24 Mishmaros, each Mishmar has a turn for a week and they cycle through, so twice a year, you have 2 weeks that are going to be either dedicated to prayer, or dedicated to actually going to Jerusalem to take part in the service. And so the whole country then centers around that service, around the service of God. And that is what's lost with the destruction, which of course happened on Tisha B'Av. If we go through Kinnah 4, what we see is that the first word of each stanza parallels the first word of the pasuk in Perek Aleph of Eicha, as is the want of Rav Lazar Kalir to consistently invoke Eicha in his in his kinos. And then the last word of each stanza is the name of the particular Mishmar. And so you can look through and you can see all the names of the 24 Mishmaros. Sprinkled throughout is an emphasis on the temple service and what went wrong with the temple service that perhaps played a role in leading to the destruction of that temple. Prominently mentioned is, of course, the murder of Zechayahu ben Yehoyada, the prophet, the son of the Kohen Gadol Yehoyada, who was stoned by the people on Yom Kippur, which was Shabbos in the Beis Mikdash. We'll have the opportunity to revisit that horrific happening in later kinos. But there's also mention of Maaser, the tithing, of the Shemitah, of the year that we should not be planting our crops, Me'il Kikara Pisilo, ripping of the Me'il, the garments of the Kohen Gadol, something that's not permitted to be done. A mention of the Lechem Apanim, how the Kohanim sinned through the showbread, and mention of Nov and Givon, places where the Mishkan, the predecessor to the temple, stood. there's also an emphasis on supporting the poor. The Beis Mikdash, the temple service, should have taught us, especially the centrality of the temple service should have taught us, that all comes from God. And if that's the case, for those who don't have, so it's our obligation to provide. God commands us to do so, to give tzedakah, to give charity, and so not supporting the poor is a direct violation not only of Ben Adam L'Chaviro, of between the mitzvos between a man and his fellow man, but also Ben Adam L'Makom, right? It casts doubt on the fact that God runs the world, that God owns everything, because if God truly owns everything and tells you to give some of what is apparently yours to someone else, what right do you have to say no? In addition, there's mention of religious hypocrisy, and again, that is a problem that should have been solved by the temple service. Anyone who's truly working in the temple, anyone who has the proper thought process, the proper intention when doing that work, cannot, for example, bring an animal as a korban, bring an animal as a sacrifice that looks perfectly fine, but in fact is on its last legs, in fact is almost dead. Such hypocrisy smacks the face of God, and therefore leads to the destruction of the temple and the loss of God from our midst. The Kinnah ends with hope for the future and a return to the temple service.